out and look a little bit more about the brain itself. And despite the brain being a very powerful organ, it has limited capacity, which, if we ignore that, leads to overwhelm and impaired cognitive functioning. So when we try to do fairly simple tasks at the same time, such as, and I'm sure we're all guilty of this, being in a meeting and answering your emails at the same time, or even just looking at your emails whilst in a meeting, what you're attempting to do is to multitask two or more cognitive tasks at the same time, which neuroscience has shown us isn't possible. It doesn't matter, I know, as a female, many of us think that we're we're able to multitask. In actual fact, human beings cannot multitask. The reality is, when we think we're multitasking, is that the brain is switching backwards and forwards at great speed, switching between the two tasks. Now, the effect of that is it puts too much pressure onto the brain to function effectively. And the outcome is our stress response is triggered, so we start to feel stressed. Our cognitive thinking, our ability to think and come up with good decisions and clarity of thought actually is impaired. Our IQ gets reduced on a temporary basis while we're attempting to do two or more things by up to 10 points, which is the equivalent to taking drugs. It's harder to make good decisions. In also, by attempting and keep trying to do two or more cognitive tasks at the same time, it increases our inability to maintain focus, so that when you need to focus and concentrate, you're making it so much harder for yourself. But also, in regards to productivity, it's actually up to, or lowers, should I say, productivity by up to 40%. Interesting kind of facts just to remember is, at any one point in time, your conscious mind can hold a maximum of 3 pieces of information. Fact to be aware of is the subconscious mind and conscious mind operate simultaneously. However, the subconscious mind processes 11 million pieces of information per second, compared to 7 pieces, not 7 million, 7 pieces of information per second in our conscious mind. And I'll go on in a second, you'll see why that's an important factor. So the prefrontal cortex is where the majority of our conscious processing takes place. The conscious processes such as language, problem solving, decision making operate mainly in that rational, logical part of the brain called the cortex. The limbic brain is our emotional subconscious processing. They're rooted in our survival instinct, the emotional brain, that fight or flight. And it has a very primitive processing mechanism. When we put on our conscious mind, i.e. trying to multitask is a good example, it means that our subconscious minds will step in and take control. So take a look at a few kind of strategies and practices now that support a much more brain-friendly and sustainable way of working. Start first of all by talking about our working memory. It is part of our conscious brain, the prefrontal cortex. Cognitive processes take place, helping us to make sense of things, to remember things, and they assist in our decision-making processes. Working memory has very limited capacity. It's very energy intensive, and it's also very easily distracted. Use about the working memory is to think of it a little bit like a stage in a theatre. The stage has limited resources, and for the purpose of this illustration, let's assume that our stage has one microphone and one spotlight. Now, when there is only one actor on stage, they have the full use of that microphone and spotlight. When a second actor comes onto the stage, there is still only the same resources. There is still only the one microphone and one spotlight. So they're having to compete for the use of those resources. So if we think about, instead of actors, think about tasks. Instead of the stage, our brain. When the brain is focusing on one task, our working memory on one task, it has all the resources of the brain, the working memory to hand. However, when we try to multitask, when we try to bring a second task on board, the brain doesn't suddenly get more resources. It's still the same amount of resource, meaning the resource, therefore, has to be shared. In summary, we need to remember that the brain is not an infinite resource. Conscious thinking part of the brain has limited resources, as we've just spoken about with the working memory and the stage. It has the capacity to hold, just remember, maximum of 3 pieces of information. And if we choose to ignore these simple rules, then the brain becomes overloaded and our subconscious brain takes control, which in turn, the first thing the subconscious brain does when it takes control is it asks itself the question, am I safe? To which the answer will be no, because the brain is overloaded. So a threat response is going to be triggered, meaning access to cognitive thinking is impaired, making it harder to work, harder to think.